Welcome. We're back in session with your host, Jay, of What's Going On, a Social Studies Network podcast. Now let's get into it. Alrighty. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of What's Going On, a Social Studies Network podcast with me, your host, Jay. And today we have.
Hi, I'm Samantha Stearns, social studies teacher at River Forest School District 90.
Yay, I am so super excited to have you today. I feel like I've wanted to have this conversation with you for a while now, and it's just not happening, which honestly, it's warm outside. It's a nice day. I'm super excited.
No, I'm glad you're here, and I look forward to having this conversation with you. You're someone that inspires me a lot, and you're not even in the classroom full time yet. So I can't imagine once you get your bearings and get your first classroom of your own, you're gonna do great things.
Yay, thank you.
Of
I
course.
appreciate that. Now tell us a little bit about yourself.
So this is my 14th year teaching social studies. Yeah, it's goes by in a blink of an eye. I've been teaching 8th grade history for the past 12 years. 2 years prior to that, I taught 7th grade social studies. And I've been district department chair for 8 years now. So
Okay.
yeah,
Busy.
very busy, but I like being engaged in more professional work too. I feel like that's a good balance because sometimes we get lost in things with the kids, and it's
Yeah.
nice to have that like professional community too.
I will keep that in mind. I definitely
Yes, for
want to make
sure.
sure I have that balance too.
Yes.
So, before I get into everything else, the first question that I always ask all of my guests when they come on here is, with this position that you are in now, what did you think about social studies now versus what did you think about it then before you got to where you are now?
So I think what has always drawn me just personally to social studies is I liked that whenever I was interested in something, I could find a social studies or a history connection to it.
Mm.
I wasn't one of those kids that grew up loving social studies. I think that's kind of few and far between for older generations. But when I was thinking about becoming a teacher, I was really kind of considering, do I want to go the English route or do I want to go the social studies route? And like what would be the pros, cons in that. And when I thought of it and kind of broke it down, my main goal with social studies is I could reach every kid in my class because everything has a past and everything has a history. So even if I have a group of students that they're totally checked out, they come in, they're like, history is my least favorite subject. I always felt there was a way where I can connect with them about something. And I think that has remained true. It's just the depth in which I'm able to form those connections has definitely evolved over time, right? Every time you teach something, you either get better at teaching it or you remain stagnant. And I think my approach is I want to approach every year when I'm covering the content in a new way because I have new students who are bringing in new experiences. And I want to be able to match up what they're interested in and what their backgrounds are to what I'm teaching in the class. So I think for me, social studies and history is more alive during the past couple of years for me versus when I was first teaching. That's a pretty progressive evolution.
Yeah. I kind of had that same thought about English or social studies. I chose English, but I love social studies. I really do.
Yeah, and that's the thing is you can dovetail those together so nicely
Yeah.
and working with colleagues too. And I think this is something like at the middle school level where you have more opportunity to be looking at like what can I do that's going to support the English department at the school? What can they just do to support social studies? And there's that opportunity for these, cross-curricular connections that I think is important.
Yeah, no, my grandma's always like, Why didn't you do social studies? You know
Mhm.
so much about history. And I'm like,
Yeah,
I connect the history when I am teaching through English. So
100%.
yeah, because I'm like those two, I feel like they go hand in hand. And I like
Yeah.
hearing more of that. But there's something that you said, like you're either gonna get better or you're gonna get
Mhm,
stagnant. And
mhm,
right now, with the position that I'm in, student teaching, I
mhm,
have a friend who's in the social studies cohort.
mhm,
And it's very interesting the way that we have been taught to
mhm,
teach these subjects and the folks who we are observing under,
mhm,
because like they have their methods down, they have the nice classrooms, they know like how to engage students in different ways,
mhm,
but the way that we were taught to teach and the way that they were taught to teach, they have to catch up to like what we're
mhm,
doing when it comes to the methods, and we're just like kind of like stuck in this place of you're the
mhm,
expert, we're observing you, we're trying to see like how do we become the better teacher, but also when it comes to the progressiveness
mhm,
of social studies and of history, it's like some people are not catching on, and it
mhm.
makes the experience so much more difficult for those of us who are like, I want
Yeah.
progressiveness in my classroom. I want to
Mhm,
teach in a way that is connecting to everybody. And I don't think that every teacher is
mhm,
getting that, especially because like just remembering my relationship and
mhm.
journey with social studies and history, I always liked it. I mean, I was a nerd, so there's that.
Yeah,
Um,
same.
but I always loved it, but there was always a formula of like,
Yes.
you follow this, you follow
Mhm.
this. We practice for the Constitution test.
Yep.
You need to know the dates. You need to know the important people, and that's about it. And
Mhm.
why are these dates important? Why is are these people important? Because of the freedom of America,
All
and
comes back to that.
it
And then
all
you
comes
grow
back to
up
that.
and you realize, wait a second, this actually isn't what our founding fathers wanted. This actually isn't why the Civil War was fought. There's also always those connections that you can build with the students too. And I think we get caught up as educators who have a couple years under our belts, like
Mhm,
there's always the opportunity to continue growing, right? Because you have new faces in front of you every single year. You have new colleagues, you
mhm,
have new technology or new resources. And I really feel like some teachers, they need help with kind of seeing like what else is out there and
mm,
what new approaches are out there. But it's also something we don't make it easy systemically for teachers to really grapple with the amount of self-work it
yeah.
takes to better show up for your students, especially if, I'm talking about like personal experience, showing up for students of color as a white woman,
Mhm,
right? There's a certain amount of internal work that you need to do to be able to kind of make sure you're consciously checking all of your assumptions. You're
mhm,
consciously checking anything that you have as preconceived notions and assumptions that you're making about your students in front of you, whether they have a similar background or not.
mhm,
And that's something that I think in teacher prep programs, we're not really taught to do a
mm,
whole lot, right? Like I think I had a class called Teaching the Exceptional Child, and it was very theoretical, but not really applicable to a lot
mhm.
of the students that you see in your first couple of years or
Yeah.
in your student teaching. So I think that's something that just overall as a system, we need to do a better job of,
Mhm,
is helping teachers have that space to grow and be reflective in their practices. And that's where you see real transformation in the classroom, is when that teacher knows that they have the trust of their communities and their support team and their administration, that they'll be okay on the other side of it when they do take those risks,
mhm.
whether it's a personal risk or a curricular risk or something, outside of that. They want to know that they're going to still have a job at the end of the day, right? So I think
Yeah.
that's part of it.
I think that turning theory into practice has been something that I have been grappling with throughout this whole
Mhm.
experience, because the classes, they teach you through the ideals. It's
Yes.
like they talk about the trauma, they talk about this,
Mhm.
they talk about that, but they always teach it in the ideals of
Mhm.
like, there's always a light at the end of the tunnel. And I'm like,
Yeah.
that's nice to think about. And
Like the
it's like,
cliche.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like you want to reach there, but it's like,
Mhm.
what happens when like that's not
Mhm.
what it looks like? But I like how you started getting more into the idea of like your positionality and
Mhm.
like what does it mean? Because I want to get into some vulnerability.
Yeah.
There's a word that we always talk about, the
Mhm.
big H word, harm.
Mhm.
And I've noticed that when we talk about it, we never get into depth about how we created that harm, what we
Mhm.
did. We always talk about the impact of it.
Mhm.
And you've talked about that a
Yeah.
lot in your story. And I would love for you
Yeah.
to get into what were some of the things that, you did that contributed to the
Mhm.
harm of your students.
Well, I think especially during my first 2 years,
Mhm.
where I was fresh out of college and I was in a school where we had to teach. There was two other social studies grade level teachers, and we had to all teach the same thing at the same time.
Mhm.
It was very, very controlled. And I think that didn't help in terms of like disrupting the harm that was happening in the classrooms. But like when you're looking at the textbook and you're supposed to be depicting someone like Andrew Jackson as like this hero to the United States, and then you're realizing, wait, this, I gave them the quiz, I did this, but then we didn't even talk about like Native American removal
Mhm.
and the genocide happening during his presidency.
Mhm.
And that's when I started to realize and started to push back on, which brings me to this school versus my other school, is, you know, if I'm not telling the whole story, like I'm causing harm, right?
Mhm.
And it did take, I would say, probably a couple years after that, when I was in this school and was able to kind of reflect on my experiences at
Mhm.
my previous school, where I was able to really sit with, you could have pushed harder. You could have done this. You could have said, okay, check that off my list like they wanted me to, and then do this in my classroom, right?
Mhm.
So I think there's always a way that we can be mitigating the harm that's happening in our
Mhm.
classrooms. You just have to be open to like hearing that. And
Mhm.
one of the things for me is sitting in that with my students,
Mhm.
right? And giving them the opportunity to provide feedback and say, like, I remember very distinctively my second year when Trayvon Martin was killed
Mhm.
and showing up to work, and the kids, you could visibly see like they were so eager to talk about it, not to say, like, did you hear this happened? But to talk about it in a way where they felt like they had community and they had space to want to identify things like systemic racism.
Mhm.
And some kids were really ready for that conversation, and it had to push me to be ready to hold that space for them. And I'm so thankful for that first two groups of students that I had that were really like, no, Miss Stearns, we're talking about
Yeah.
this. Either you're going to be a part of the conversation or you're not, but we're going to be talking about
Mm.
this. And them having that power to like say that, and then me being able to be like, this is the stuff I got to get better at.
Mhm.
These are the things happening that they're seeing, that they're worried about, that their parents are worried about, them walking down the street and something happening to them. I need to be able to not only recognize that,
Mhm.
but also show up for them and give them the space to digest this and speak about this with their peers and their community members. So I think those moments really helped me lean into that like more, I guess, like teacher activist heart,
Mm.
where I wasn't afraid. Because, as teachers, it's like, we want to get tenured, we want to get
Yeah.
this, and then we'll go do things.
Yeah.
And I think, part of what pushed me to come to a different school was that ability and recognizing that I wanted to push myself and I wanted to be a better teacher for my students. I needed the space and the autonomy to do that.
Mhm.
And I think that's where I've been able to interrogate my curriculum. I've been able to give more of my students a voice and say, this is not how our background is connecting with the history curriculum. This is not like what's connecting with me and my family. And I think that's been something that, every year, I think teachers can either get better, or like I said, stay stagnant. And it's just that work of interrogating yourself
Mhm.
to see where you can get better. And I think that's part of that, is recognizing that I was actively doing harm to my students by ignoring things,
Mhm.
not
Mhm.
talking about current events, not prioritizing their their space and the trauma that they might be coming into the classroom with, just based on the world that we live in. All of those things, when I started to kind of really sit and compile those, I was like, you're doing a really disservice
Mhm.
to a lot of the kids. And you're also not modeling for the kids who do have positions of power.
Yeah.
You're modeling being a bystander instead of being someone that can step into that power and start making changes. And when I really thought about that, that's when I was like, okay, I got to do better. I went to grad school to get my master's in history so that I was more of a content expert. And that was significantly eye-opening, just how many like gaps I had in so many different areas.
Mhm.
And that's something that, I continue to try and do is if I don't know about something and my kids are interested in it, all right, let me go read about this and let's, come back to in a week and we can start discussing this.
Mhm.
So I think having that back and forth is helpful with them too.
Yeah. Oh my God. You said,
I said so
and
much. I
I,
know.
yes, and I took in every single thing
Okay,
that you
thank you.
said. I
Thank
definitely
you.
did. Something that I do want to go back to that you
Mhm,
talked about is you having to sit
mhm,
within knowing that harm
mhm,
that you created and
mhm,
that, you curated within the classroom.
mhm,
What did that reflection process look like for
mhm,
you when you had to sit within that? Because I know that could
mhm.
be like an uncomfortable thing, and
Yeah.
we can, as teachers, like get into the mindset of like, oh my God, like I'm gonna get fired. Like I'm not gonna like
Mhm.
how am I gonna pay for like bills and all that
Yeah.
stuff? Like, oh my God, like what is my reputation gonna look like
Mhm,
as a teacher? And sometimes we like forget like what
mhm,
does it mean to not only be a teacher but be that human being in the
mhm.
space with other human beings. So just wondering, what does that reflection process look like for you?
I think for me, it was a lot of sleepless nights.
Mm,
I'm kind of a person when something's on my mind, like my
mhm,
brain is going to keep going. And what helped me is really journaling and identifying, okay, if I'm having these feelings of, I wouldn't say they were guilt,
mhm,
because I think there's a practicality in self introspection and self reflection too, that you're doing it because you want to be someone that is making changes and
mhm,
improving, right? So I think there was that layer of you've caused harm.
mhm,
How are you going to rectify this? And the only thing that I could see that would take care of this is I can't go back. I can't, reteach those students however much I wished I could. So
mhm,
what I need to do is make sure I'm making progress and moving forward.
mhm,
So it kind of started out as this is going to be my focus for the next couple of weeks. So if we were looking at, someone asking me to create a curricular change or something, that would be my short-term goal. And then over the summer, here's what I'm going to really revamp and make sure that I hit hard and make sure that I create space for in the fall. So I think having kind of like a checklist of things I wanted to accomplish helped me see not only the work that I had to do,
mhm,
but also what students and what groups of students that I was maybe letting down that
mhm,
I needed to actively work to improve.
mhm,
So it's like kind of picking apart, here's the strengths that I have as a teacher, here's the weaknesses, and like kind of thinking of like a Venn diagram. Where are these overlapping? My strengths are I make great relationships with my kids.
mhm,
The second part of that is also, okay, but are they superficial relationships? Are you helping them
mm,
really develop as human beings that are going to be active, engaged citizens and take care of each other? Or is it just, they play the trumpet and band or something, So I really did a lot in terms of that and asking kids to show up like, hey, do you guys want to join this club that I started? And can we talk about some of these issues that I'm seeing in my curriculum in my classroom that I
mm,
am trying to acknowledge and trying to fix? What might your experience be that could help me do this?
mhm,
And honestly, there was a moment of, is this a problem because I'm asking them to give me this feedback and they're, eighth graders,
yeah,
but they're really honest. That's the one thing is like they're going to tell you. Either they're
yes,
going to tell you with their actions or they're going to tell you verbally, but you're going to know how they feel about you seeing them and you valuing them and
mhm,
you hearing them. And I think that is the biggest difference
mhm,
is the more opportunity I gave my students to say, nope, this is not something I want to do. This is not something that I think is beneficial. This is what I would like to see in the future. The better my craft got.
mhm. And then something that I think that is super important about what you said is that not only are you allowing them to be a part
Mm,
of the process, but even going back to the conversations when your students are
mhm.
like, you're either going to be a part of this
Mhm.
conversation or you're not
Yep,
going to be a part of this
yep,
conversation. Either way, it's happening and
yep,
you have to be here for it.
yep.
I think what's so important about that is this idea that I've been trying to like figure out is
Mhm,
like
mhm,
trusting your students, knowing that
mhm,
they are capable of telling you what they need and what they want,
mhm,
and getting out of that idea of like, I'm the teacher. I can see what you need and I can
mhm.
see what you want because I watch you every day. But
Yeah,
it's like, okay, we can do that.
yeah.
But like, is that genuinely helpful for them and in
Mhm,
their journey and in their processes? Now, with that, because clearly you're allowing them to like take the forefront
mhm,
and take charge of who they need to be to grow within the space as you as their teacher. When you started to, rectify the harm and you started to have them give like the advice
Mhm.
and the feedback, did you actively say, I'm sorry? Like, did you actively have that conversation with them?
With former students or with current
Both.
students? So former students, some of them, yes.
Mhm.
Some of them that I was still in communication with. We had conversations like my oldest students now are 26.
Okay.
So they're very able to articulate some of the things that they wish would have happened or could have happened. So there is some aspect of that. And that's something that I think is important to make sure that I kind of recognize. But yeah, I mean, I do say that. And I think, a couple years ago I had one of my students who went to a private school not far
Mhm.
away from here ask if she and another student who I didn't have that was from a different school, if they could come in and teach a lesson about Native American women. I think they were doing a project for their current history class.
Mhm.
And they said, we didn't cover any of this in your class, and this is something that we feel should be highlighted and important. I was like, you're right, we didn't cover that in my class. And yeah, absolutely. Let's make sure we get this done. I think kids are more forgiving than we give them
Yeah.
credit for, and they respond well to that vulnerability.
Mhm.
So there's plenty of times where we've had conversations about historical events like Red Summer, right? And kids are looking at how close that is to the town that we're in, River
Mhm.
Forest, and
Mhm.
where this was all happening. And they're asking questions and making connections across time, and how does this have an impact on the segregated communities now? And they are ready to have those conversations if you give them the space. So
Mhm.
I think first kind of recognizing hey guys, if I had your older sister or older brother or a sibling or something or a cousin and we didn't do this, in their year, it's because I wasn't a good enough
Mm.
teacher to be recognizing that. And I didn't know what I didn't know. And these are the things that we're going to do from now on to make sure there's not a situation in 20, 30 years where we still have history teachers doing simulations about slavery and
Yeah.
you know what I mean? So I think that happened here. So
Oh
yeah.
gosh.
So I think there needs to be an acknowledgement, because also that I think that makes you feel better just as a human being.
Mm.
Like you're
Mhm.
not trying to be performative. You're not trying to be in the moment. You're truly trying to do the work. And I
Mhm.
think that has to start with a reckoning of where you were at, the harm you did, and then not getting stuck in that guilt,
Yes.
but moving forward.
Mhm.
Because you're not going to help anyone and you're not going to rectify things if you're just stuck and sitting in that guilt.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, some of those are tough conversations, when students are being like, I didn't feel included in your class. And that I think is the hardest thing you can hear,
Mm.
right? When you're a teacher. I didn't feel seen, I didn't feel heard, I didn't feel valued in your classroom. And the only thing you can do with that, if you're going to stay in the classroom, is you have to fix that.
Yeah.
And you have to interrogate why that student didn't feel seen, didn't feel heard, didn't feel respected. And then you go from there. And it's
Mhm.
just, you have to keep moving forward. You have to keep moving forward, and you have to do the work. There's no easy way out.
Yeah.
And there's no, I think, finish line to a lot of this, because you're always going to have students that you don't connect with for whatever reason, that you got to find a way. What's the end that you might have with them, that you can make those connections so that they feel that you're showing up for them and they feel comfortable being their true selves in your
Mhm.
classrooms.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I'm learning. I'm getting a lot. I'm getting a lot right now.
Glad.
Yes, okay. So speaking of like this is a continuous journey,
Mm-hmm.
like you have to sit in it, you have to
Mm-hmm.
go through it. There is no easy way out.
Nope.
It seems like, that cliche term of
Mm-hmm.
like that light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
You are kind of like going toward that. You are reaching that in certain ways. And it's not
Mm-hmm.
like so linear where it's like, we have a
Mm-hmm.
couple more steps there. It's like
Yeah.
sometimes a step back, sometimes a step forward,
Yeah.
sometimes whatever the case may be. But what does it look like to, because I don't want to always sit in the harm and sit in the trauma.
You
I
can't.
don't want to do that all the time.
No, you'll become paralyzed
Yeah.
if you
So
do
what
that.
does it
Yeah.
look like to do the opposite of harm?
Mhm,
What does it look like to reach that light and to have that positivity and sit within
mhm.
that as well?
Well, I think there's no end to it, because
Mhm.
if you're focused on all of the different experiences the kids are coming into your classrooms with, I mean, that's so expansive that there's no possible way you can cover and recognize all these different identity markers that they have and all these different values that they might hold dear to them. And so there's no like end goal, but I think what makes the difference, and I think what shows up for me as a teacher in year 14 that didn't show up for me probably as a teacher in year 3, year 4, year 5, year 6, year 7, year 8, wherever I want to land that at. I think it's the recognition that I choose
Mhm.
where my continuation goes and where any regression happens.
Mm.
It's not my supervisors. It's not just the students. It's not the community members. It's recognizing that I do have a certain level of power, not only in my position as a teacher, but also my position as a white woman in education,
Mhm.
and how I can leverage that to keep the conversations going.
Mhm.
So I think this is something that over the past couple of years, I've been a lot more passionate about in terms of if I can make these changes in my classroom,
Mhm.
other people can make the changes there too. And wanting to like kind of share that story of how it is uncomfortable to sit and be like, I did harm to, I counted it up one day and I was sickened by it. It was like, okay, if I taught 160 kids a year on average, and I didn't really start teaching just essential history like Reconstruction
Mm.
until, I don't know, six years ago. That's like that's like 1,500 kids that I actively did harm to. And when you sit in that and you're like, wow, that's a lot of kids who didn't get that piece of the puzzle,
Mhm.
who might not understand things happening in the world now because I didn't
Mhm.
give them that missing puzzle piece, right? That's more so what I think pushes me to still want to improve every single year, where I
Mhm.
still want to make sure, okay, if we cover something in depth and like these particular students feel really seen, really heard, they felt like they had a great experience in social studies. Okay, what about the ones that didn't?
Mhm.
How am I still going to address that? So I have every single student in here feeling like they're given the opportunity to be successful and be seen. So I think it's just, you have to just recognize the areas of strengths that you have and the areas of weaknesses that you have and be willing to move forward with that.
Mhm.
You can't just sit in it, but you can't also not do anything about it.
Yeah. I think a word that you brought up
Mhm.
that I was thinking about is guilt.
Yeah.
I think so many people get like they freeze in that guilt
Mhm.
that they just refuse to move forward because they're like, I don't want to
Mhm.
acknowledge it. I don't want to think
Mhm.
about it. And I feel like if they
Mhm.
do acknowledge it, if they do say, okay, let
Mhm.
me fix what I did, I have to face that discomfort. I have to
Mhm.
face their guilt. I have to face that guilt
Mhm.
head on. And I think that's something that's really scary for people to think about.
Yeah.
But the one thing that I always come back to is that you're uncomfortable teaching it. What
Mhm.
about the students that are uncomfortable living in
Bingo.
it all the time,
Yeah.
every day,
Yeah.
coming into your classroom? And even like what are the students who do know
Mhm.
about the missing puzzle pieces
Mhm.
that aren't there? Like are they even comfortable saying like, I don't necessarily agree with
Mhm.
everything that we're learning right now. Can we go a
Mhm.
little bit further? Like what does that look like to allow the students to also be comfortable within themselves? Because so often we can kind of set the tone of
Mhm.
like how they
Mhm.
how they journey and how they grow and
Yeah.
how they come up within our systems,
Yeah.
which is very interesting to think about because I've been kind of like rectifying that there
Mhm.
are experiences that they have when before they come in the classroom,
Yep.
before they walk into the school doors, before they get onto the bus or into the car to come to school. And I have to understand that I am one piece of their day.
Mhm.
I'm still an important piece of their day, but
Mhm.
not only am I consciously thinking about how I'm impacting them, I'm thinking about what happened before they
Mhm.
came into my classroom. Like, did they get in trouble? Did they
Mhm.
get into an argument? Like, did they eat breakfast? Like,
Yeah.
what did they
Did
learn
mom and dad
before
fight
they
last night? Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
what are all the factors that they're
Mhm.
coming in as a full person? Because
Mhm.
I'm also, thinking about history is everything.
Yeah.
And I've been
Yep.
like,
Say it again.
yes,
Say it again.
history is
Yeah.
everything. Yes. Oh my God. I get let the congregation say amen. Amen.
Exactly.
But no, I've been like history is everything.
Mhm.
There's so much that
Mhm.
makes up history. And
Yeah.
our students, they are part of that
Mhm.
historical journey, making up what are we going to do next? What are we going to
Mhm.
learn next? What are we doing now to continue on our journey?
Mhm.
And I think while like talking about the trauma, while talking
Mhm.
about the harm, while being like extremely vulnerable is important, I hate getting caught in that because I was talking about that like before I came here. Is that like when you like growing up as a Black person, like a
Mhm.
lot of the times, like
Yep.
trauma, sadness, like violence,
Mhm.
violence. And it's like that is valid. That is
Mhm.
there. That is a part of the experience. But I think also too, when we work so hard to avoid harm, we work so hard to avoid trauma,
Mhm.
we work so hard to avoid all these negative things, we end up perpetuating that because that
Mhm.
is all we set our sights on
Yep.
and that is all that we focus on. And I try so hard not to center myself there and let myself stay there. I want it to be a part of the conversation,
Mhm.
but I also want, like, what does Black joy look like?
Yeah.
What do these conversations look like? How do I allow this to happen as a teacher?
And how does Black joy show up in our classrooms and in our curriculum? Because
Mhm,
I think especially with history, and I think this was part of some of my introspection too, is, you have these narratives of oppression that we immediately connect with as Black history, right?
mhm,
So you talk about slavery, or you talk about, the civil rights movement, and you're focusing on something like that in the context of, okay, well, Dr. King was assassinated, Malcolm X was assassinated.
mhm,
You're not focusing on the autonomy and agency that Black Americans have had even long before the civil rights movement, long
mhm,
before the Civil War. And that was something that I think grad school really helped me see. There was a book we read called Sweet Land of Liberty, and that really helped me see not only how I was having gaps and like my
mhm,
understanding of Black history, specifically Black American history, but like where else then did I have gaps? If,
mhm,
I'm identifying this and I'm seeing, hey, in my classrooms, we're talking about all the negative aspects of Black history. We're not celebrating.
mm,
We're not, looking at, particular readings that are celebratory in nature instead of just looking at, narratives of people who have been oppressed. I think that was kind of the first step in like addressing some of that, where you have the balance of, yes, here's the struggle, here's the oppression, here's the marginalization, here's the other side of it too. And how
mhm,
do we go from one to the other? And what does that look like? And how does that happen over time?
mhm,
And I think that invites students to really interrogate like the institutional powers that exist in this country, where when you're giving them that opportunity to see Black joy, or you're
mhm,
giving them the opportunity to see Latinx joy, or you're giving them the opportunity to see Asian American, Pacific Islander joy, you're giving them the lens to see, okay, these were the issues that might be considered a barrier, but this is how they were overcome. And it's also a model for them to start movements of their own and
yes,
take, accountability for, the world that they're living in. And I think that's the part as history teachers we need to do a better job of. We
mhm,
can't just get caught up in climate change. Your world is burning. Politically, we're really bipartisan. We're really at a really polarized time in political history. We can't just focus on those negative aspects,
mhm,
because then that gets the kids to think there's no point in the future. What should I work towards if everything is just bad and terrible and oppression?
mhm,
So I think that is, there's that fine line of, like you're saying, with the guilt. It's okay, if I always feel guilty, how am I going to connect with my students? If I'm
mhm,
always on my tiptoes, trying not to do anything wrong, I'm going to fall flat on my face.
yeah,
And I want you guys to call me on that so that I don't do that next class or next year or something like that. And I think when they hear things like that, and you actually show that, and you actually say, oh, guys, I messed up on this, like I'm
mhm,
really upset that this happened, or you misspeak, or you do something, you have to be able to take that ownership in front of them.
mhm,
You can't, go to the side. And it's one thing to like pull a student out of the room and apologize to them for something that may have happened,
mhm,
but I find it's more powerful to do that and then also bring back to the classroom. The reason I pulled them out is because this
mm,
interaction happened,
mhm,
and I wanted to make sure that you guys know that I apologized for it and that I take responsibility for
mhm,
that. And I think modeling that is really powerful
yeah.
for them.
And I love being called out by my students. I don't know.
Yeah.
It sounds like, ooh, they feel safe
Mhm.
to say something.
Yes, yes, and then sometimes you're like,
I'm like, yeah,
okay,
yeah,
okay,
let's,
I'll take it,
yeah,
I'll take it."
take a breather, let me turn
Mhm.
around, take a deep breath,
Yep,
turn back around, get back into teacher mode. I am
yeah.
the adult in
I'll
this
cry
situation.
later.
Yeah,
I'll cry later. I'll cry on the drive home. That's what it's gonna be. That's fine.
I'm
When they get
definitely gonna call my grandma and I'm
Uh-huh,
gonna bawl my eyes out
uh-huh,
later. But right
yeah,
now, I'm trying to
mhm,
fix some things,
mhm,
trying to make sure that you feel
yeah,
safe in this space with me,
yeah,
trying to make sure that you feel open, trying to
mhm,
make sure that this journey
yeah.
like we're taking together is. Yes,
And kids are good about like identifying people being genuine.
yeah,
You know what I mean? Like that's something I really appreciate
they
about
know.
my students. They know, and they know when you can see it in their faces. If you're saying something and they're like, no, you're lying right now, or you're not telling the full truth, or you're giving an excuse, like they know. And I think that's something too that when you were bringing up guilt, like, and saying people have a hard time with that. I think, sometimes, and maybe I'll be controversial, so we'll see. But
Be
I think
controversial.
sometimes a lot of white teachers, they use that as an excuse.
Mm,
You know what I mean? They use that as, I don't want to feel, I can't show up and do my job if I'm feeling guilty about this, and I can't make these changes
mm,
because admin might be mad, or, one community member who, has social media on fire might say something.
mm,
You have to weigh that with the experiences your students are having, right?
mhm,
You can't just look at that and be like, hey, I'm worried about this one person talking to my superintendent or something. You have to be able to kind of recognize that you're going to have points where, especially as a history teacher or an English teacher, there's going to be conversations you're having in your classroom that not everyone is going to be supportive of, not because you're saying the wrong thing or the kids are saying the wrong thing. It's they just don't want to have a reckoning
mm,
with their kids. They don't want their kids to be able to see, hey, these are things that happen in your generation that I don't
mhm.
think should have happened. Can you tell me like what that was like for you? And I think some people just want to kind of ignore that and
Yeah.
erase it. And
Ooh,
I
erase
don't,
it.
I don't allow that. No whiteouts, no erasing. Just you got to sit with it. It's history. It happened. We have to give a voice to it, and we have
Mhm.
to reckon with that and grapple with that. Otherwise, what's the point of being in a community of learners?
Yeah.
When you are educated, you do better, and when you do better, you can fix things. And
Yeah.
that's.
And you seem like you've done a lot of like turning theory into practice because
Mm-hmm,
you've mentioned that quite a few times about like how you've
mm-hmm.
read this book or you've done this thing,
Yeah.
but
Call me out on
you've
my nerdiness. That's
but
okay.
look, it's fine. I love reading the books and doing all
Mhm,
that stuff too. But I
mhm,
think something that's very interesting with
mhm,
you is that you'll
mhm,
have different activists like, I read this book.
mhm,
I'm learning these
mhm,
terms. Look at me. I'm being so activist right now. And it's like, what are you
mhm.
doing with that? And it seems like you're
Yeah.
putting a lot of theory into practice. What advice would you give to people like
Mhm,
even just starting off at the
mhm,
basic level, at the small level, like how do you make these ideas practical? Because some people, because like you
mhm.
said, they want to hide, they want to erase it, they don't
Yeah,
want to talk about it.
yeah.
So for those people who have those fears, and even for people who are in like
Mhm,
that realizing state that you
mhm,
were in of like, let me step back, let me
mhm.
focus on how do I get better. For those groups of people, what advice do you give them that's like practical on how to like get better?
Yeah, I think the practical thing and the practical advice is kind of think about your circle, right?
Mhm.
Think about, what diversity you have in your circle and why that is.
Mm,
And if you start there, then you can start to see, are you making choices based on assumptions, based on how you grew up, based on X, Y, or Z, whatever that might be. And when you start to just incrementally take those positions of self-introspection, that's going to bleed into your practice, right? You
mhm,
can't, I mean, who we are outside of the classroom is largely who we are in the classroom, I think, for
mm,
most
mhm,
teachers. And I think you have to recognize that you form relationships best with students and you are able to be your genuine self um with being vulnerable with them.
mhm.
And it's just, I guess the advice piece is just at the end of the day, be thinking about like you either made a kid's day better or you made a kid's day worse. And that's kind of like my self-check barometer,
Mhm.
especially if you have a rough day, like, and it's eighth period or it's fourth period or it's whatever, and you're like, ooh, it's almost Friday, it's almost spring break or whatever. You have to be able to coach yourself into, okay, how am I going to be showing up for these people?
Mhm.
And I think that's that step. There's no magic wand, there's no book that's going to fix everything.
Yeah.
It's just doing that self work and thinking about how can I actively improve? What areas can I do a little bit better in? And then being willing to do the work. I think, a lot of times, blame it on Google, blame it on whatever. We just want to have a quick fix.
Mm.
I want to search up how can I teach all of these different groups of people in my classroom that read at various levels, that have various different experiences. You're not going to find it. It doesn't exist. So like, what work are you going to do to then make sure that you're still showing up for them and they are seen and heard and valued in your classroom? So I mean, that's a long-winded answer, but I think it's just you're being more conscious.
Yeah.
You're being more present, you know, and you can read all the books you want, but if you don't actually sit and kind of think and internalize what you're reading, that's not going to make any changes. So like you can't just say, "Oh, I read Stamped, so now I'm anti-racist." Like, are you? You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you want to put that into practice so that no one ever has to question your integrity about how you're showing up for any of your students. And I think that's a big thing, that you're going to make mistakes. You're going to fall on your face sometimes, but your students are going to give you the grace and the understanding that probably a lot of adults won't.
Yeah.
And that's who you're showing up for every single day.
Yes, I love that. That was great.
Oh,
The last
thank
thing, the last thing that I do want to talk about and
Mhm.
get into that I thought you brought up that was very important is
Mhm.
the idea of outside factors influencing
Mhm.
the way that we show up. Like, oh, this parent, they're
Mhm.
gonna come and say something to me. Admin, I'm gonna get in trouble with them. How do you like? How do you like? What advice would you give to actively?
Mhm.
No, I don't want to say fight, but
Yeah.
journey. Yeah,
Resist. Yeah.
yes, that is the
Yeah.
word I'm looking for. Resist.
I think it's, you know, I can't tell other people who are in different positions what they should do, because I don't know their position, right? I don't know their communities. I don't know the support they're getting from their administrators or anything. So I think the biggest thing for me is I'll ask for forgiveness when needed, but I'm
Mm,
going to do what I know is best for my kids. And I'm going to trust in the expertise that I have as an educator. And I think, you know, for newer teachers or teachers who are pre-service, being able to kind of find your squad, and we've said it, you know, so many times, that is what helps you grow and step in and lean into that power.
mhm,
Because if you don't have that and you're just seeing all of your colleagues are doing the same old same since when
mhm,
you were in school or things like that, if you don't have a model for someone that actively resists or actively shows up in ways that others don't, then it's really hard to do that on your
mhm,
own. But that doesn't give you the excuse to not do anything,
mm,
right? So I think there's that element that you have to give yourself permission to grow, but you also have to make sure that you're not making excuses for yourself.
mm.
And I think that's kind of part of the growth process.
Okay.
Did that answer your
Yes,
question?
no, it definitely
Okay.
did because I'm coming in with all of these like
Yeah.
new ideas. And I'm like, I want to be so radical. Let's
Yeah.
tear everything down.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, let's do that. But like,
Uh-huh.
let's like build it up first.
Yeah.
Let's like wait and balance it out first. But it's so
Mhm.
difficult when you've had so many people in your ear. Like, I've
Mhm.
literally had a professor tell me I was
Mhm.
combative and
Mhm. Mhm.
that if you go in with that kind of attitude, you're gonna get fired. And I'm like,
Mhm.
no job, not in this economy. Like, it's just it's just so scary just to think about all
Yeah.
of these different ideas. Cause
Yeah.
sometimes I find myself like
Mhm.
being a shell of myself because
Mhm.
I don't want to like get called out. Like, I know the
Mhm.
way that I look and I know the way that I present myself.
Mhm.
And I know that sometimes it is not
You're a
palatable to
beautiful Black woman,
her.
and you're
Thank
a
you.
beautiful Black teacher, and that is exactly what we need more of, and being able to name that and step into that, that is what scares some people, but that's all the more reason why you have to continue to do that. Not that you have to sacrifice yourself or your standing or anything, but this is the importance of having allies who are in positions of power and have that positionality to power, that need to step in and step up for our teachers of color. That needs to be happening on a bigger scale. Statewide, region-wide, nationwide. That's what needs to be happening to affect more change. Because there shouldn't be one person telling you, based on how you look, based on how you're presenting yourself, you're not a good educator for our children. They have no idea based on, you know, how you look, what you wear, how you dress, whatever. That's this thinking that because you don't look a certain way, you're not going to connect with kids. Kids are pretty open-minded.
Yeah.
You know, we don't give them the credit that they deserve. And I think, you know, for someone to say that to you would almost make me want to leave the profession if I were in your shoes. Like, that's where are you supposed to go from there?
Yeah.
You know, I just don't understand those conversations that people think aren't gonna have like this impact on people. So that upsets me for you, but it's a reality. And this is why like I try and show up as much as I can for my colleagues because they know I'm not the type that's gonna sit down and let someone talk over me. So
Mhm.
fine, I'll play that role for whoever I can because I know at the end of the day it's what's good for students. And I think if that's like your mantra, that's the thing that you hold dear, eventually that gets associated with your name. Right.
Mhm.
And that reputation that you have this integrity and that you're showing up for your students and you're doing what's best for them. There's less and less questions about what you're doing and how the students are learning when you've shown that you know what's best for the kids in your
Mhm.
classroom. And I think it's hard to find that, and it's hard to tell new teachers that because it's scary being a new
Yeah.
teacher. Like they can fire you for anything, for cause or not. And that's a scary situation. But you can't also say, just wait till you're tenured. Wait to be your real self till you're tenured. It's not, we can't do that. So I think there's systemic issues that we have to address to fix that so that more people are attracted to the profession and more people
Mhm.
stay in the profession
Yeah.
because it's an issue.
Yes, but every day we
Mhm.
persist. I
We
am
do.
not going anywhere.
I love it. I
and,
love it.
and with that,
Mhm.
as we conclude, the
Mhm.
one thing that, well, the second thing that
Mhm.
I like to ask from my guests is drop that knowledge out of the whole conversation. We talked about a lot.
Yeah, we
You
did.
gave a lot that I will
Thank
take with
you.
me after this conversation. I will be rewatching this over and over and over again. But what is that one thing that you
Mhm.
want people to remember and take from this conversation if they remember nothing else?
That we have a lot more power individually than we think we do,
Mm,
and you don't always need permission to do what you know is best.
mhm,
You have to be willing to take personal risks, and you have to be willing to do the work that you want your name associated with. There's a lot of performative things happening in our country in a
mhm.
lot of different ways. And it's up to you to maintain that integrity that you want for yourself by
Mhm.
showing up how you want to show up and what's best for the students that are in front of you, which is again
Yes.
long-winded. I apologize.
No, I love all of it. We need these are the conversations that we need in
Mhm.
these spaces.
Mm.
What I would say, I'm gonna steal from you
Okay.
because I steal a lot from my guests, but it's fine. Yeah.
I always heard teachers are the best thieves. I heard that all through undergrad,
I say that all the
all
time.
the
We are the
time.
best thieves. There are
Uh-huh.
so many resources for anywho,
Why
okay,
was so
whatever.
broke? Why was so broke then? I don't understand.
Because America hates us. They don't like just do the hard labor. You don't
Uh-huh.
need to get
Yeah,
paid for it.
that's it.
That's a different conversation.
Yes, it is.
But what I will say is that give your students more
Mhm.
credit.
Yeah.
We have to be open with them the way they're open with
Mhm.
us.
Mhm.
They are such open
Mhm.
vessels, and we have to be willing to be open vessels just like them. The
100%.
problem is not they're closed off. The problem is that we're closed off and we
Mhm.
project that onto them, not
Mhm.
knowing that they are willing and they are ready to be there at our
Mhm.
side and learn with us.
Mhm.
And I loved that you called them learners because I'm a firm believer that teachers are students and students are teachers, and we are all
Mhm.
having transactional
Mhm.
relationships, learning from each other. That was also long-winded, but
It wasn't.
that
No,
was
and the fact that you can name that and you're still a pre-service teacher, that just shows like how amazing it is to have a person who truly knows what a valuable education is and knows how to meet students where they're at. I mean, I can't wait for you to have your own classroom. And I can come
yay.
visit and learn from you. I
And we
can't
could be
wait.
teacher
I love
friends.
it. We'll be each other's squad, so we
Love
can
that.
support each other.
Thank you. And with
Thank
that,
you.
that concludes another episode of What's Going On, a Social Studies Network podcast. Peace.